Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to the Winning Play Podcast. I'm your host, Drew James, here with my co-hosts, Kendall Capps and Rob Hue. We're going to break down everything that just happened in Week 12 of the NFL and start looking forward to Week 13. Boys, Week 12, once again, upsets taking over the NFL. Let's start with the Texans losing to the Tennessee Titans. Titans looking like they might be able to play spoiler here the last few weeks of the year. Kendall, what were your takeaways from that game?
I was furious because it cost me some money on my money line parlay of the week. I didn't see Houston laying that big of an egg, especially defensively. They made Will Levis look like a Pro Bowler. I think he started 12 for 12 for like $150 in that game. It's like, that guy hasn't gone 12 for 12 maybe since high school. So that was really disappointing. CJ Stroud even said after the game, like, I'm not playing well at all, not up to my standards. He's certainly having like that sophomore slump. We're seeing that. And maybe even a bigger surprise was Mixon's inability to move the ball. I think he had 22 yards on 14 carries in that game. He had been on fire coming in, and he couldn't get anything going. So it was really disappointing, I think, across the board for Houston.
Yeah, I mean, all season long, I've really liked this Titans defense, or at least the pieces they have in place. I mean, they've been a pretty tough defense. They just, it's hard to play defense all game when your offense is so sputtering for most of the year, giving the ball away or things like that. So I do want to give them a shout out. But yeah, I mean, the bigger story here is for sure the Texans' offensive woes. I was watching that game, and it was pretty interesting because some of it's a combination of CJ, some of it's a combination of I didn't like their offensive philosophy to start the game. CJ's absolutely taken a step back. I don't even know specifically what the problem is. He just doesn't look the same. He used to be dicing people up, and, Tank Dell's had a couple drops and stuff, but he just has not been surgical like he was last year so far. But it looked like they really wanted to force the ball to Nico and Tank and really get that passing offense humming. And so at the beginning, they really didn't use Mixon the way they have all year. And so I think, it kind of set them up on a bad platform to start the game just because they really didn't start with their bread and butter. And once they went to him, it was a little too late,
Yeah, I think at this point, you got to start wondering if having a year to get tape on CJ Stroud, if defenses have started to figure him out, if he's got to go back this offseason and add some elements to his game or figure out what defenses are doing differently. But he doesn't look like the same guy we saw last year taking his team to the playoffs. And while
they're lucky they're in
the
AFC South, though.
They are.
But yeah, they're
well, except for the fact that they have to
spot.
play the Titans, I guess. And that Titans defense looks extremely solid. And you've also got a couple Titans players we'll talk about in a bit, like Calvin Ridley and Tony Pollard, who are going to come into play in the fantasy playoffs here towards the end of the year. These Titans aren't a pushover like they've looked like for most of the year, but the Texans have got to get something straightened out before the playoffs start. We all assume they're still going to win this division, but it looks like it's going to be a quick exit if they can't make some gains.
Yeah, as of right now, they would be hosting Baltimore if the playoffs were starting today. And I don't think anybody on the planet would give Houston much of a shot in that matchup. So, yeah.
It's the only team Lamar has basically beaten in the playoffs.
Well, another team that's headed for the playoffs that dropped a game nobody thought they should lose this week, Commanders losing to the Cowboys.
My God.
Now, the way that fourth quarter ended, they really probably should have at least sent it to overtime. Couldn't come through, though. You're losing to Cooper Rush and the Cowboys. I don't want to hear about how it's at the last second. Rob, what happened in this game?
Guys, I don't know if you remember, but a couple weeks ago, I kind of mentioned that, I wanted to look and see because Jaden, with his rib injury and Cliff Kingsbury history as an offensive coordinator, I kind of was a little skeptical of this second half slide narrative that I had been kind of seeing picking up steam in. And before this bizarro 85-yard Terry McLaurin touchdown where the Cowboys defense, I don't know what they did. It looked like one of those Hail Mary or one of those hook and ladder plays where the defense isn't ready for it because it didn't look like anyone was trying to tackle him after he caught the ball. So it was really weird. Before that, their offense looked really, really mediocre. And Jaden Daniels was not really
putting it nicely.
I know. And this Cowboys defense is not good.
They had 9 points against this Cowboys defense early in the fourth quarter. They looked awful on offense.
It was brutal.
And Drew, you talked about maybe there was some tape on Stroud, enough tape that people are catching up. I have to wonder a little bit the same thing about Jaden Daniels. Like, we saw him come out of the gates breaking every rookie record that there was the first 5-6 weeks. And we now have 5 weeks of truly subpar performances consistently from him outside of that.
Yeah, but I don't think
play.
It's Kendall. I don't think it's tape on Jaden Daniels so much as it's tape on Cliff Kingsbury, because he doesn't move his receivers around, and Terry McLaurin just stays on one side and plays the whole thing from that side. So if you just know to roll your coverage that way, you're going to have Noah Brown beat you and then dump offs to Austin Eckler. And then if they get to the goal line, then you can use Brian Robinson. But it's like, it's really odd. And then they have Zach Ertz running up the middle, but there's no movement, there's no motion. It's very much just like college style calls at the line and doing that. And I think the defenses have woken up to him the same way they do almost every year. So it's a little nerve wracking, and Jaden's, passing acumen isn't quite there yet. But, when I look at the marriage of these rookie quarterbacks with their offensive minds, at first I thought that Jaden and Cliff Kingsbury was a pretty good match, but now I'm wondering if the ceiling of Cliff Kingsbury is already approached and it's already capping the output of the offense.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Rob. I wonder, why is Terry McLaurin third on the team in targets? Sometimes fourth the last few weeks. He's not getting the ball. He's clearly your best weapon. But then also you got to wonder how healthy Brian Robinson Jr. is, only getting 5 carries this week. The run game in Washington not being able to sustain any momentum outside of Jaden running. Things aren't opening up quite the same way, but like you should be able to run on this Cowboys defense. Everyone has been able to run on this Cowboys defense. Again, the Cowboys aren't going to make the playoffs, and the Commanders probably are, but you have to worry about how that's going to end for them if they keep playing in this way.
I don't know if the Commanders will make the playoffs. It's not guaranteed. If they keep sliding games, I mean, there's a eventuality where if both NFC South teams, the Falcons and the Bucks, kind of win out, there's a reality where if they lose a couple games, the Commanders, I mean, they could lose out of this like wild card race that's happening. The NFC North is going to take some of those non-division winner spots, and then there's just one or two. It's kind of tight right now. So if they can't figure it out,
they're in 7th right now. They're in the last wild card spot, and they're only a half game ahead of the Cardinals, and 1 game ahead of the Buccaneers and the Rams.
And there's everyone else from the NFC West. There's right. A plethora of teams that are sitting right there. And it's not so much that they've gone and caught Washington. It's just that Washington is on a 3-game slide and went from 7-2 and looking like world beaters to, oh shit, like we're not playing good football and we keep losing games now.
And by the way, like they made that trade for Marshawn Lattimore. Where is he? He hasn't even practiced yet. It's been a couple weeks.
Yeah, that's not looking like a good trade at this point.
So I mean, it's like it's pretty wild. I actually I thought that a couple weeks in, once he got his feet wet, he would really, really help that defense. I think that they're really leaky in that secondary still, and he would really allow them to move Sanderson to his natural position in the nickel as a slot cornerback, and I really thought it would help with Dan Quinn. But, if he doesn't come back for like 1 or 2 more weeks and then takes a couple more weeks after that, it's a little bit like too late.
It might be too late
for him to help that defense. Yeah.
I believe they are 0-3 since the Marshawn Lattimore trade.
Yeah,
which
they haven't won.
Doesn't bode well. Let's move over though to the NFC West. There, the Cardinals on kind of a streak here. Then the Seahawks come in and put a stop to that right away. This division is in chaos, or at least up for grabs. Kendall, who's your favorite to head out of this division?
I think I still like Arizona the most. I think Seattle's the most fraudulent, even though they won this game. That was a tough spot. It was in Seattle, which is always a very difficult place to play. And Kyler and that offense has been hot and cold all year. Some games they look like world beaters. Other times they don't get much going. But when you look at Arizona's schedule the rest of the way, it's really, really light. And knowing they already have a solid divisional record, San Francisco's 1-3 in the division. They're in maybe the most trouble of everyone in that division. Plus, they're super banged up, so it's hard to really like the Niners at this point. We still don't even know if Brock Purdy is going to be back this week. And if they don't get him back, they're probably having no shot at winning in Buffalo. So now they drop another game out. So the Niners are in serious trouble. The Rams, I mean, they have talent, but they are so young, especially on the defensive side of the ball, that it's hard for them to remain consistent. And when they run up against a true physical opponent like they did against the Philadelphia Eagles, they obviously haven't been able to hold up. And offensively, at times they look great. Other times against Miami a couple weeks ago, they didn't look that great. So I'm not that high on the Rams. So by default, I guess I'll take Arizona to win that division.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because all of these teams still play each other. Cardinals still play the Seahawks again. The Cardinals still play the Rams and the Niners again. I think the Rams play the Seahawks and the Cardinals still. So there's so much up in the air. I'm going to go with you and say the Cardinals, but I could definitely see the Rams pulling it out or the Seahawks. I don't think the Niners are going to be able to get it together fast enough. The way I think Bosa's probably not going to play again this week. Purdy is practicing limited today, so he may play. The Niners definitely seem like a team experiencing a double Super Bowl loss hangover. And so I'll take anybody but the Niners at this point. What about you, Rob?
When you say fraudulent, I don't know, maybe it's because I believe in the Seahawks, but I just think the Cardinals are the most fraudulent. I kind of have the whole year. I'm always, I really am not a huge Kyler Murray fan. Now he has these stretches where he plays MVP levels, but I just don't really ever see him putting it together consistently week in and week out. I mean, there was a weird stat at one point where he hadn't won back-to-back games in 2 years or something until recently, which is crazy. It's just interesting. It's not that I actually think the Rams are going to pull this out. I wanted to say the Seahawks, but they still have Green Bay and Minnesota to play, and I just don't know if they're going to win that. The Seahawks, the thing is with them is their defense is actually coming on. They did this weird move where they picked up Ernest Jones from the Rams, a little divisional trade, and then they cut their leading tackler a couple weeks into the season, and their defense has kind of stepped up. It's what helped them win this last game. And the Seahawks, when they win, it's because their weakness, their offensive line, is not dominated by the defensive line of whoever they play. And that's what happened. The Cardinals don't really have a great defensive line yet. So they didn't get dominated that way. But the problem is the Rams do have a good defensive line. And I do think that when the Rams are on, they have a feisty defense and Matt Stafford with that offense that can lead them. And I'm with Drew a little bit that I do think the 49ers at their peak are the best team in this division, but I think it's going to be too little too late. So I don't really like Seahawks remaining schedule. So I think the Rams are going to make a push here for the wide open.
Well, let's not
NFC
forget
West.
the team Seattle beat is just a bunch of dumpster fires. They beat Denver in week 1, but that was Bo Nix's first career start. They beat Miami without Tua. Then they beat a couple other 1-win, 2-win teams, and they've lost to every good
Buffalo,
team they played.
right? Didn't they beat
Seattle?
Who was it that?
No,
they beat the 49ers. That's what it was. They beat the 49ers.
Yeah,
coming in on the game winner, Geno.
Missing half of their team.
Yeah.
Well, let's look at another almost upset. The Panthers play the Chiefs a lot closer than anybody expected. I know they were never really in the lead, and they had a chance to tie and then missed a 2-point conversion, and then the Chiefs put them away.
No, they got missed the 2-point conversion. They tied the game.
They tied it. Yeah, they did.
They did. Okay, sorry.
And then, of course, Mahomes let him down for a game-winning field goal.
And kicked the field goal at the end. Correct.
Which, I mean, I'll be honest, and I know everyone is going to be like, see, there's more evidence that the Chiefs, you can't trust them this year. But it's at 0 point in that entire football game did I have any concern that the Chiefs were losing that football game, including when Carolina tied it with 1:30 left. It's well, now we obviously know what's about to happen. Mahomes is obviously going to lead them down, and they're going to kick a game-winning field goal. And they could have easily scored a touchdown if they had to. They were moving the ball at will. So I just think they're playing down to competition. It's almost like they remind me of the Lakers from the early 2000s. When it's we already know we're going to win almost all of our games. We're going to play around, and then we'll flip a switch when we have to flip a switch. And they seem to keep being able to do it.
Yeah, I thought this game was almost more about Bryce Young finally looking to show some of the promise that people saw in him early. This was maybe the best Bryce Young game we've seen so far. Just some incredible throws, getting crushed by 2 defenders and still throwing dots. Bryce Young looked like, hey, okay, maybe we've got something here. You can never expected Carolina to win this game at any point. You got to know if you're the Chiefs, every team is coming to play like it's their Super Bowl whenever they see. So, for the Chiefs, put another win in the bag. Let's move on. They play the Raiders next week, which, again, will probably be closer than it should, and the Chiefs will come out with a win. But the Chiefs are gearing up for how do we set ourselves up to look good in the playoffs at this point.
Yeah, well, I hope that they try and do that up in the playoffs and stuff and see how that works out, because they kind of did that with Buffalo too, and then Buffalo did what you have to do with this Chiefs team, which is at the end of the game be up by more than one score, and then you can just relax and let them do what they're trying to do over and over and over again. But but that was
the first time in 3 years any team beat them by more than one score. Like, it's hard to do that to the Chiefs. And the one guy that has done it, the guy who did it 3 years ago, was also Josh Allen.
Beat the Chiefs, right? But Buffalo, I can believe that Buffalo is going to beat the Chiefs, and then if they were to play Baltimore later, then Lamar has a chance. But it's just interesting to see who plays who when, because I think between those three, it's like one team can beat the other, but lose to the other. So it'll be an interesting thing to see how it all shakes out.
Well, it's really funny because, like, even though I agree that on paper the Bills are a much better matchup, and in the regular season they're 4-1. Josh Allen's 4-1 against Mahomes, but 0-3 in the postseason, two of which were great games, and they came down to the very end. But at this point, it's like, it's interesting to see that there are two teams that have been like knocking on that Super Bowl door in Baltimore and Buffalo, and they haven't been able to get through because neither can actually beat the Chiefs when it matters. And like, I want to see it happen, but until it does, it's like, man, I don't know.
Lamar and Josh are Phillip Rivers and Peyton Manning. I mean, that's what they are right now with the Brady race. You know what I mean? It was Brady. You have to get through Brady every year during that Patriots dynasty, and Phillip Rivers is like the Lamar because they have that spectacular offense during a regular season you always see, and then they choke it away in the playoffs. And Peyton Manning is kind of like the whole offense on the Colts. And I mean, it's different styles, obviously. I'm not talking about the type of player archetypes, but the narratives are the same. You know what I mean? And so, it's really interesting to see this happen again in a cyclical fashion where you have these AFC teams, these superstar quarterbacks, and they just have one guy the boogeyman that they can't seem to beat.
Well, and Peyton eventually broke through, which I remember that day very well. I talked to Drew quite a bit that day. The Patriots led 21-3 in that AFC championship, and Peyton led them back, and they won 38-34 in one of the craziest games I've ever seen. And that was a very good night for Drew.
Kendall had never met me when that game happened, because that was my very first day setting foot in Los Angeles. I went to watch the Colts.
Oh, there was another
Patriots.
Playoff loss I'm thinking of. But
yes,
I remember that game very
That was my very first day in LA. But
was it really?
It was. I got off the plane and went to the bar, and when I got to the bar, the Colts were down 18-0, and thought it was over. Or 21-3.
The fact that you were still of drinking age back then, Drew, is
quiet, Rob. I was well over drinking age, actually. Well, let's move on from the Chiefs, though. Head to my favorite subject here. The Miami Dolphins have won 3 straight, albeit not against the strongest competition. That's about to change this week. But their offense looks great. The Tua named AFC Offensive Player of the Week this week. Their defense still holding teams under 20 points routinely, looking really difficult. Huge game for Miami this week on Thanksgiving against the Packers. Normally, the Dolphins win on Thanksgiving. They played there a lot against the Cowboys mainly, sometimes the Packers, but usually those are games the Dolphins win historically. Can Miami get back into this wild card spot? Can they catch either the Broncos or the Chargers? Kendall, what are your takes here looking forward?
I mean, with the way they're playing, it's tough because they're playing exceptional on both sides of the ball. The offense is finally, they got Jalen Waddle finally heavily involved this past week, which has got to be, a nice thing for Dolphins fans to see. And it's not just only throw the ball deep to Tyreek. In fact, they haven't really done much of that at all since Tua came back. But the offense as a whole looks really, really solid. The defense, as you've been talking about for 2 months now, Drew, especially the secondary, is one of the best in the league. And no one was talking about it because they were losing games
Chop
close.
Robinson, I believe, over the last 3 weeks is the highest graded pass rusher in the NFL on PFF.
He's a beast. I've been watching him. I texted you
amazing.
This last week. Yeah, I texted you this last week, man. Chop's a guy.
But knowing you're one back in the loss column. You essentially both the Dolphins and the Broncos have four conference losses. You don't play each other this year, so that's going to be your primary tiebreaker. And so even if you drop this game to Green Bay on Thanksgiving, that one wouldn't be the loss that would potentially keep you from making the postseason, because you still have a bunch of conference games after that. You got the Jets at home, at Houston, who's reeling a bit right now. You get San Fran at home, who's reeling, then at Cleveland and at the Jets to finish. So a rather favorable schedule for the Dolphins. Meanwhile, the Broncos have Cleveland at home and Indy at home, but then at Chargers, at Cincy, home against KC, their final 3 games. I could see Denver losing all 3 of those games. So even if Miami loses this week, I still think you have a decent shot of stealing that final wildcard spot.
Can you go 4-2 and still make it? Can you drop 2 games in this stretch?
Well, the Dolphins are 1 game back of the Broncos in the loss column and 2 games back of the Chargers in the loss column, but the Chargers and Broncos still play each other once. So one of those teams will definitely be adding 1 loss. So at most, we will need to make up 1 loss between the 2.
Okay, because I see you guys dropping the Green Bay and San Fran, but I don't see anything about Houston that I'm super impressed with, and I think you sweep the Jets and the Browns supposedly. The Browns with Jameis has been a little bit of a beater for better teams lately, but the Green Bay one is just tough because it's going to be super cold, and they're kind of like humming on the rushing defense and stuff like that. But I see you guys making a push. As long as you guys, I'm not saying you will drop 2 games, but as long as you guys can go 4-2 and still make the playoffs, I really like your chances to make that final push.
Yeah, I think if you do go 4-2 in your final 6, my guess is Miami will get the final wildcard spot.
I would guess that I think we can go 5-1. I really think we could win this Green Bay game this week. I think it'll be close, but if we win that, I'd say, yeah, Houston and San Fran are possible games we could drop, but I could see us going 5-1. And then if we beat Green Bay, yeah, I definitely think we've got a good shot. Again, looking at the Chargers still play Kansas City and Denver, but they also play Tampa Bay and Atlanta. The Chargers still haven't beat a winning team this year.
Really?
They have not looked good against, and they can't score 30 points. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Atlanta can score 30. Los Angeles can't score 30. I could see either of those teams dropping 3 games.
Well, Atlanta's playing like a losing team right now, so I think that they're going to get a get-right game against Atlanta. But yeah, the Kansas City, even Denver is going to be a really tough one for them. I mean, I personally think Tampa Bay is going to present a problem for them, but you can make an argument that that's our toughest game remaining on the schedule and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you, Drew. I mean,
but remember, tiebreakers are more than likely going to come down to conference records, which the Chargers are also a game ahead of both Miami and Denver right now. And since they're not playing, since Miami doesn't play them, yeah, no, they still have a couple. But if the couple losses come from Atlanta and Denver as opposed to KC or Denver, Atlanta and Tampa as opposed to KC or Denver, and if they go 4-2 or 3-3, but 2 of the losses were NFC losses, they're going to finish with a better conference record. So like them being 2 up overall and 1 up already in conference record makes catching the Chargers much more difficult. If I was you, Drew, a Dolphins fan, I'm rooting for the Chargers to beat Denver, making you have a far clearer path catching Denver.
We will know more on that by the time that game comes. Because if they lose to Kansas City, now the conference records are kind of even. Then really we just need one of those teams to win that Denver game, and we need a win.
But I do want to put one pin in something really quick, which is if it comes down to week 18 and you need to win, and if you win, you're in, I am not counting out a trip to the Meadowlands against Aaron Rodgers in his final game with the New York Jets, the arch rival, the team that has ruined the Dolphin season many, many times, doing it to you once again in week 18.
Sorry, which season have the Jets ruined for the Dolphins? You must be thinking of the Patriots or the Bills or other AFC East teams, because we've owned the Jets, as has everyone, for years and years.
Yes, everyone has recently, but there's been a number of late
for the
season.
Last 20.
I don't know, I wouldn't call it 20 years, but.
All right, well, let's move on. Get in here to our fantasy fallout from this week. Let's start with the running backs. A lot of stuff is fluctuating with fantasy running backs now. You've got Josh Jacobs, all of a sudden, solid running back one. Devon Achane, looking like the guy you first drafted him as. But also Jahmyr Gibbs, looking like he should be in your lineup every single week. And Bucky Irving, especially with his schedule the rest of the season, is almost a must start at this point. What are your feelings, Kendall? Which running backs do you like most coming out of this week? Which ones do you think are coming up? And who do you think maybe is sliding back that could be looked at as either a trade or a bench candidate?
Well, we've been hyping up the Bucky train for quite some time. And Rob being our resident Bucks fan and me being our resident Bucky fan, we've been riding that train. And outside of one dud week, he's been a stud every week. He had a monster week again this past week. And like you touched on, his schedule looks really solid. So going forward, I feel like at this point, he is a must start. But knowing David Montgomery is nicked up and Jahmyr Gibbs, now obviously if you have Jahmyr Gibbs, you've been starting him every single week. Like he's been a no-brainer start every week. Without Montgomery, he becomes probably a top 5 running back, potentially, knowing the sheer volume that he's going to get in the running game and in the passing game on what is probably the best offense in the league. Now, granted, I know that Montgomery, it doesn't seem like it's a long-term injury. He might even still play on Thanksgiving, but I wouldn't be surprised if some of his role is scaled back, especially if they get up big on the Bears. So this is a really, really big week for Gibbs. I think you're staring at on Thanksgiving. Detroit tends to do really well at home on Thanksgiving anyway.
Well, they don't need Montgomery, you know? They don't need Montgomery. Yeah. They're 10-1 or whatever it is, 11-1 or whatever they are. So
that's the thing though. Like, as you point out, yes, they are 10-1, but the Eagles, who are 1 game back, you can easily make the argument, have a better, more clear path to the Super Bowl than Detroit does. Because Detroit has a 9-2 team and an 8-3 team in their division that they still have to play each of them. And
it's crazy.
If they don't win the division, now Jared Goff is the 5 seed going outdoors on the road every game in the playoffs. And we know how that usually plays out for Jared Goff, right? Whereas the Eagles, their floor is the 2 seed. They basically are the 1 or the 2, and that's it. So, like, Detroit can't really take the foot off the gas.
Yeah, that division is everything that we had hoped it would be coming into the season. It's looked a little different than you thought, but the records are everything that we had hoped it would be for sure.
But yeah, and Drew, you talked about like running backs that maybe you might want to be a little bit more hesitant. Kyren Williams, the last couple of weeks, he was on that crazy heater of like a season and a half, it felt like, of scoring a touchdown every single week. The last couple of games, the offensive line has really struggled to open holes. He has not looked like the same guy. I don't know if he's dealing with an injury that hasn't really been disclosed. Knowing Sean McVay, that there's a chance to see that. So, like, that's one guy that, obviously, if you have him, you're starting him. But I think you need to temper expectations until we can see the Kyren that we saw earlier this season. And with some of their matchups not being cupcakes coming up, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a little bit more of Blake Corum actually getting some run. They really haven't used him all year. They used a pretty high draft pick. Dude scored 30 touchdowns his senior year in college. It's like, the guy can play. So, if Kyren continues to struggle, I wouldn't be surprised if we see more of like a 60-40 split toward the end of the season.
I mean, I've watched Blake Corum's like reps and stuff like that. There's a difference. There's a step down from Kyren. Like when you watch Kyren run, he looks like he has more juice than Corum. I mean, Corum is kind of a little bit of a grinder. Lately. And in college, but you can see it even on reps, even with like, it doesn't show up in the stat sheet or anything like that, but you can see them both run. And Corum had that incredible offensive line at Michigan and stuff. I'm not sure what I think of for Corum as a pro. He doesn't look super explosive. He kind of looks like he's a runner that will, like a backup running back that will get the yards that the offensive line provides. But another guy like in that same vein is, and Drew, you may not like this, is Jonathan Taylor, just because, you gotta take the whole picture into consideration, which is this offense led by Anthony Richardson and their points potential. And also, they got the injury to Josh Downs. We don't know how serious that is, but, overall, I know maybe this isn't the right spot for it, but, the narrative is starting to come out to defend Anthony Richardson a little bit about these receivers making drops and not maximizing their young QB's potential and stuff. But, I mean, let's keep it on subject of Jonathan Taylor.
What game tape are you watching? I saw Fox run a melt where he was missing dudes wide open left and right.
Whoa.
Anthony Richardson was awful this week.
No, dissect. Did you see the drops? He had
the
3
melt.
drop touchdowns.
Walked
3 drop touchdowns hitting open guys in the hands, and they
he
can't
had
catch
some
the ball.
Also,
3.
He also, Fox ran a melt of 5 plays where he was missing wide open guys all around the field. So then
I watched a different melt of him hitting guys that were tough throws all week and guys dropping them. So, yeah, he might have missed a couple, but I think Anthony Richardson is not being well served.
I mean, more specifically, though, we got to look at Jonathan Taylor and be worried because he started to come on. And, Drew, you were kind of calling him a running back 1 the other week or whatever. And I was a little more hesitant. And I don't know if you can even call him that anymore. To be honest, him and Kenneth Walker are 2 running backs that I'm a little nervous about. And I kind of see them in the same way. Now, Kenneth Walker's a different situation. Their offense is humming, but their offensive line is just not good. Kenneth Walker's putting together the best 2-yard runs consistently that I've ever seen. He's having to juke 3 dudes to get 2 yards every single time, and he does it. I mean, he is an incredible player. He's just not in a great situation, the highest pass rate in the NFL and things like that. So both those guys are struggling just by their situations.
I am a bit worried about Jonathan Taylor, obviously, but there's hope on the horizon. Hey, you're not playing the Lions defense every week, who has looked great, and we knew they were going to get blown out in this game. But also, looking at their schedule coming up, they've got the Patriots. Now, the Broncos, they play a week after that. Broncos are a harder defense. And then they have Titans-Giants in the playoffs. So
Titans are hard too, man.
Yeah,
actually,
the Titans are a great defense.
So
it's
if you're in your fantasy
be tough.
championship game, I'd like him against the Giants. But yeah, I don't think you can trust him as an RB1 where you've probably had him to start off the year. I mean, this offense just is not cooking like that, regardless of the talent. They need to figure something out, but he's definitely scary if he's locking down your running back position, as he is in at least one of my leagues. Let's talk about some injuries, though. We also had J.K. Dobbins down. They're saying he's probably going to miss at least this week, maybe more. Brian Robinson still dealing with injury. Eckler on the Commanders also injured. And then we just got a report this morning that Breece Hall has knee soreness, is missing practice. Which of these guys are you concerned about? Which of these guys are you panicking that they might miss out? Or who's the most impactful injury here?
I mean, Dobbins.
Well, I
mean, it's got to be Dobbins, right? Because I mean, we don't even know what his knee injury is. They haven't even really released what the situation was. He did walk out, but also Brian Robinson, because he's kind of been nicked up over and over and over again. So the fact that he's kind of doing that, and honestly, overall for this Washington offense, the fact that both Robinson and Eckler are out with the new way that we handle concussions. I mean, Eckler got absolutely smashed on that play. And it's not always as bad as it looks, or you can't always correlate the time gone. But I mean, concussions, some of these players have missed multiple weeks with concussions. So we don't even know when that's coming back and stuff. So if you have any of the Washington backfield, unless you picked up McNichols, things are up in the air for that team for sure.
Well, and at the very least for this particular week, because yes, the Dobbins injury has a lot of fantasy implications long-term rest of season, knowing his injury history and how much the Chargers, score rushing touchdowns. They don't throw the ball into the end zone a whole lot. But for this particular
week, get into the end zone a lot, but yeah.
The fact that Breece Hall is popped up on the injury report and not practicing with knee soreness on a Wednesday. Now, we'll obviously monitor through the week.
After a bye week.
After a bye week, it's really, really concerning. And Braelon Allen, we've seen he can play. It's just that he doesn't get a ton of reps. And Breece Hall in that running game, Breece Hall had a monster game before their bye week. They finally went back to giving him some touches. So I think for this particular week, I think Braelon Allen and the Breece Hall is one to seriously monitor, because even in Washington, if you have Brian Robinson Jr. or you had Eckler, you're only using Eckler anyway if B-Rob was down, or maybe as an emergency flex play because he catches passes. But if you had either of those guys and you were planning on starting them, McNichols doesn't catch any passes. I think he has 1 catch on the year. So knowing that, it's how much are you really trusting him, knowing the way their offense has looked lately? And game script might actually script him out of the game to some degree. So yeah, he might get 8 to 12 carries, but unless he gets in the end zone, he's probably not really well served to help you in your fantasy lineup this week either.
I do want to say, Kendall, the Bucks are the guys that drafted Jeremy McNichols originally out of, I believe, Boise State. He does profile as a pass-catching back. So I think it was a little bit because Eckler was on that team, and he is like the more elite pass-catching option. I think you'll see him catch passes in this next week. I could be wrong, but he does have that in his skill set. So I did want to throw that out there because that is something he's done. He did it on the Titans when he was there for a short period of time. So, I mean, that's
what
nothing.
I thought I would remember. That's why I was surprised when I saw he had one catch. I was like,
yeah, I think that's a little bit of just a mix.
He looks like a scat back. He looks like a guy that was made to catch passes out of the backfield. And it's got to be, when he played, Eckler happened to also, because Eckler's missed, numerous games throughout the year. So they probably just aligned where whenever he was ready to go, Eckler was there.
Yeah, totally.
Well, we got one other running back here coming back from injury to talk about. Isaiah Pacheco, expected back for the Chiefs this week. Are you starting him? I know we got to talk about how much he's going to share the ball with Kareem Hunt. Are you popping him back in your lineup, or are you waiting a week to start him, Ken?
I have him. I've been waiting all year for him to come back, and I am for sure starting him. Now, granted, I was lucky enough that I was able to get Kareem Hunt when he went down, and I've been riding Hunt every week, and for the most part, he is sufficed because he has scored touchdowns. But if you look at most of his metrics, yards after per carry, yards after first contact, like nothing really stands out that he's an explosive player. It's just the Chiefs, they kind of took a page from that Patriots dynasty, which is we're going to throw the ball between the 20s and then we're going to run the ball in the end zone. And that's what New England did for years. And the Chiefs are doing that consistently. But I do think there is a difference if Pacheco is healthy. A large difference between Pacheco and Kareem Hunt at this stage in his career. So even though Hunt might still get some of the work, and he might even get 30%, 35% of the snap share, I have to trust that they see the upside if Pacheco is actually healthy enough, which he practiced fully on Tuesday. So that's a good sign. It's the first time he's done that. That's a good sign that they feel good about him, knowing it's in what would be a prime time Black Friday game against the Raiders, against a divisional opponent. Like, I'm firing him up, and I'm just going to hope that he looks like the guy of old.
So are you starting both of them, or are you just starting Pacheco over Hunt?
No, definitely no. You can't start both of them. You can only start Pacheco. You can't start Hunt.
I'm a little more hesitant on starting either of that backfield. I see both of them as more of an RB3 or flex, just because I do think with Andy and getting his guy back, I do think if they get down close towards the, to the red zone of the goal line, I do think it's one of those things where it's like, let's get our guy a touchdown, like Pacheco, So, like, I do see him getting, like, around, like, 12 points, like a touchdown with, like, maybe 40 or 50 yards. I don't think he's going to come back and, like, all of a sudden he's getting, like, the majority of the work and all that stuff like that. I think they saw too much out of Kareem, and they want to keep everybody healthy and fresh for the playoffs and stuff. So it's a little bit of a sticky situation because, like you said, you've been waiting all year, and it's kind of not a situation that I want a piece of right now, because I do think it's going to be a couple of weeks before you get, that type of usage and that player. And because Kareem Hunt played so well, I don't think you're ever going to get where you got Pacheco drafted at. So it'll be an interesting situation moving forward. But I find it hard to tell people who have been waiting all year to sit him. I just would temper expectations.
Yeah, that's fair.
Well, let's move on then to the other position of need in fantasy, the wide receiver group. We've got a bunch of guys putting up numbers now. Some I want to talk about: Jamar Chase, A.J. Brown, Puka Nacua, Nico Collins, Amon-Ra, Terry McLaurin, Cooper Kupp. All these guys are balling out. Kendall, let's start with you. Let's start breaking these guys down into tiers. I assume Jamar Chase right at the top of the list, but let's go from there. Who are you putting in that top tier of wide receivers?
I think, we finally got to see Nico put up some production this past week. I'd probably have Chase in a category of his own, which, the fact that they got Higgins back probably only helps him. But in any event, that offense seems to be humming. So I think it's fair to say that he's in a stratosphere of his own. He's the number one player in fantasy so far this year. But Puka Nacua consistently has been the number one shot for Stafford, especially on downfield throws. You look at that Rams offense week after week after week since both of them came back. Even though Cooper Kupp has been consistently getting you 15, 17 points in fantasy, so much of that has been, little swing routes and curl routes, and he's a red zone threat, as he always has been with Matthew Stafford. But Puka is the guy that's getting all of the 20-yard, air yard targets, which is what I want a piece of. I mean, it's only a matter of time before he breaks one or two of those like he did the first week of the season for long touchdowns. So I really like Puka maybe as my number 2 in that group. And then another guy that I know like the jury was a little bit out on as a wide receiver 1 at the beginning of the year, but he continues to just show that he's just that good, and that's A.J. Brown. Like, he is so, like, it doesn't matter which corner you put on him. He is just a physical freak. And if you put the ball anywhere near him, his target share is not even that great, and he still puts up 15 to 25 pretty much every week.
To your point, I was looking at the stats today of the wide receiving leaders. Now, Jamar Chase up there, 1,000 yards. Nobody else over 1,000 yet. JJ, 939, blah, blah, blah. A.J. Brown's at 11th in yards, but he's only played 8 games. He's got 727 yards on only 39 receptions. He's averaging almost 20 yards per catch. If the Eagles just throw it to him a couple more times a game, he looks like he should be in that same tier as Jamar Chase. Now, I agree Jamar should be tier 1 by himself because he's done it all. But what A.J. Brown is doing on the looks he's gotten so far is completely ridiculous.
Well, I mean, the ceiling to A.J. Brown is just the efficacy of Saquon Barkley right now. I mean, you're only getting capped for A.J. Brown because Saquon's ripping off runs left and right and having an insane season. If there's a little bit of less, if it's a little bit less efficient for Saquon, then they'll start to throw more and you'll see more targets if they get behind in games. But I mean, Nico, I still have faith in as ascending up because even though CJ looked, honestly, I don't want to say awful, but he looked pretty awful. Nico still had a great game fantasy wise. So I mean, in a game where CJ is going to be able to sling it better, because I still have faith that he won't look that bad the rest of the year. I see Nico busting in through that, and I'm with you, Kendall. I think I'd rather have Puka than Kupp, but I mean it's close, and Kupp is. I don't want to give the wrong connotation. Kupp is a little more touchdown dependent, but in this offense, that means Kupp is touchdown dependent, but it's a situation where every time they get to the red zone, I mean they're looking to Kupp. So I mean it is one of those things where it's not like an unsafe touchdown dependent option. But without those touchdowns, Kupp's stat lines are less than Puka. So I'm with you a little bit on those. On the
Kupp still has more yards than Puka, and I believe more catches.
He played way more games. Puka missed 6 weeks or something.
6 weeks, yeah.
Puka's played 6 games. Kupp's played 7, so it's not way more. But he is still ahead in yards and catches and touchdowns.
Well, yeah, but if I remember correctly, Puka also left in the first quarter of one of those games. That was his injury. So he missed 2 games.
I believe Kupp did too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to downplay Cooper Kupp. I mean, he is the red zone threat, and that's an effective position. But I mean, you have to admit he is floated more by touchdowns than Puka. Puka is the between the 20s guy, and not that Kupp's not, but I mean, when you watch the Rams play, it's pretty obvious what they want to do between the 20s and then what they want to do in the red zone.
I will say one guy that we haven't talked about yet that we just mentioned on this list that does concern me is Terry McLaurin. Needed a Hail Mary for 86 yards and a touchdown at the end of this game gave him a great fantasy total. But watching his last 5 games, catches 1 catch, 5 catches, 2 catches, 5 catches, he doesn't get more than 6 catches anymore. I know that he's a guy I trust to catch an 86-yard Hail Mary every week. If they're not throwing him the ball, I can't put him up there in the same tier as those other guys we just mentioned.
Yeah, that's fair. I think season-long stats, it shows that he's up there, but he had such a huge start to the year. And you're right, all the evidence seems to show that he's not going to be as reliable, and maybe he's more of a leaky, risky wide receiver too.
Yeah, if your trade deadline hasn't come, I would definitely be trying to move him. I'm actually very concerned about him just because the overall situation doesn't look good. That offense doesn't look right. There's not really a lot of things that have been happening over the last month in his surrounding situation that makes me feel like a turnaround is coming. I mean, when you're getting out-targeted by Ertz and Noah Brown, and your offensive coordinator doesn't move you around and doesn't seem to have a more complicated offense. I mean, defenses are biting down on Terry, and it was, like I said, we talked about earlier, it was a weird play that he got that big play on. It was a weird defensive execution by the Cowboys where it didn't look like anyone was ready to tackle him. So, you know, I'm with you on that for sure.
Let's look at a few other receivers here who are kind of getting concerning. Justin Jefferson is not dominating like he was. Garrett Wilson has kind of taken a downward turn. Drake London, DK Metcalf, none of these guys look that trustworthy. Are those any of those guys you're benching, or are you trying to replace, or who worries you the most heading into the playoffs here?
I mean, I think if you have any of those four guys, you're starting them. There's reason for concern for all of them. As someone that drafted Justin Jefferson in one of my leagues, and I was under the impression that he was having like this monster year by week 8. And then the last 4 weeks, he's getting like 2 catches for 30 yards. And then I looked a little bit deeper into what I thought was his monster start to the year, and it wasn't nearly as great as I thought it was. It's just that he was putting up 18 every week because he scored a touchdown every single game. And that's obviously not sustainable to score every single game. And now that we've watched Addison really take on a prominent role in the passing game, especially on downfield throws, and now TJ Hockinson really stepping it up. He had a huge game this past week against the Bears. I am really concerned. Now, again, am I benching Justin Jefferson? No, I'm not out of my mind. But there is legitimate reason for concern that him being a legit top-tier wide receiver 1 was a bit of a mirage, and really he's maybe a high-end wide receiver 2.
I'm actually a little bit less concerned for Justin Jefferson and for Drake London than Garrett Wilson and DK. Justin Jefferson, I think what's going to happen is I think he has maybe 1 more or 2 more weeks of this lower, because here's the thing. 1, they played the Chicago secondary, one of the best secondaries in the league. And then 2, if you watch that game.
They're going to play again in a couple of weeks.
Right, but if you watched that game, they more than even rolling coverage to Justin. They did almost a true double on him almost the entire game. And on top of that, he got like 3 PI calls on him. He had a long touchdown called back on an offensive pick call. So I mean, like, there were a lot of things that happened in that game that contributed to it. And I think what's going to end up happening, because this is what's been happening the last couple of weeks, is that they've been bracketing Justin and forcing Sam to go to other options, and he wasn't doing it at first, so it was working. But then this recent week, he did it, got it to Addison, got it to Hockinson, like you said. So I see 1 or 2 more weeks of Justin getting bracketed, but once if Sam can keep it up and show that it's not going to work to just shut down the offense that way, I think a little regression is going to come back, and you're going to see the 15 to 20 that we've been seeing from Jefferson. So I'm a little bit less worried about that if you're a team that doesn't need him for this next week or 2. And then the Drake London, he's wide receiver 1 on that team. I think that, Kirk's going to be up and down, and this Atlanta team is a little fraudulent, like I called at the beginning of the year, but I do see that happening. I'm really more worried about Garrett Wilson and DK. Garrett Wilson for the Jets' dysfunction, and DK just because he's in a great situation with a high pass rate offense, but the Jackson Smith and Jigba and Geno connection is real. And my whole thing with DK is they have like Green Bay and Chicago, who are both really good secondaries. My whole thing with DK is that he's going to get the attention of the defense over JSN. So he's going to get the cornerback 1s, the Jair Alexanders, and the Jalen Johnsons of these defenses, and he's going to get that attention and allow JSN to kind of get the more underneath targets and work on on cornerback 2s and stuff. So
JSN's already getting a higher target share consistently week after week now.
Yeah, and in that offense, he's an important piece of it. I mean, as a guy that happened to trade away DK and Kenneth Walker, we talked about a little disappointing, just right here at the buzzer. I was nervous about both those guys, so that's why I moved on from them. How about you, Drew?
Well, I'd say so. Smith and Jigba started slow. Rob's loved him all year. We had a big talk on here, and I was kind of like, I just don't know if he's going to put it together. Since then, he's just been tearing the league up. He's wide receiver 7 on the year in fantasy this year so far, and that's with a slow start. I'm not worried about DK, but I'm more worried that from the JSN standpoint of, yes, he's going to take some touches. Wilson scares me. Terry McLaurin scares me. These guys, though, you're probably still playing them. But let's talk about some of these up-and-coming wide receivers like JSN that we had ranked lower all year who are now coming on. Let's say a few names. Cortland Sutton, I think currently wide receiver 9 on the year. Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jacoby Myers, and Calvin Ridley. All these guys have all of a sudden looked like really solid wide receiver 2s. Which one of these guys do you want the most? Are you starting all of them? Is there any of them that you think might fall back to earth here at the end of the season, Kendall?
I was a big proponent of Jacoby Myers coming into the season. I'm a Pats fan. I watched what he did in his brief stint in New England, and all the guy did was catch every single ball thrown his way. But he didn't get many targets, and our offense was atrocious, so it didn't look anything good statistically. He goes out there, he's the number 2 behind Devontae, but once again, catches everything thrown his way. All he does is impress. And then Devontae gets shipped out, and his target share goes up, and you have to be like, hey, this guy, he looks like he's going to be a legit 11 target, 8 catches for 80-plus yards on a weekly basis. And then Gardner Minshew is now maybe gone, and Aiden O'Connell is maybe not coming back from IR. So they might have John from down the street throwing passes this week against a Chiefs defense. And God knows, maybe it's Rob from up the street. Maybe it's that Rob. I don't know who's going to throw passes next week. But that certainly put a damper on. Well, yeah, eventually. But they still don't know. He's still on IR, I think, right now.
He's playing this week.
Did they actually activate him?
Yeah.
I mean, but again,
he's played.
To me, there is a step down, though, from Minshew, to O'Connell.
Yeah, to your credit, right? It's a big step for Jacoby. You're right.
It's something that it bothered me because I was such a huge proponent of Jacoby Myers as a player, just as a football player for a few years now. So I guess because of that, I'm going to take him off the table. And at this point, how can you not like Cortland Sutton? And, it's been a few weeks, but it's time for me to eat some more of my crow. I was not high on Cortland Sutton at all. So many of the advanced metrics were really down on him the last couple of years. Turns out, really, the guy does have talent, and he just needed a quarterback that could get him the football. And Bo Nix has obviously ascended as a rookie quarterback, and it's consistently week in and week out. Sutton is a red zone threat, a downfield threat, an underneath target. He's doing just about everything in the passing game for that Denver Broncos offense that suddenly is moving the football consistently, and they're not running it very much. So for me, I'll take Cortland over all those guys, I think.
Yeah, my order would be JSN, Cortland Sutton, then actually Ridley, and then Myers. And Myers only because of this QB change. He was quietly doing so well, like you were talking about with Gardner Minshew, but I don't trust him with Aiden O'Connell. Ridley is boom or bust. He gets these deep downfield targets, and it's relying on Will Levis, which is a little scary, but he is the wide receiver 1 on that team. And for me, the differentiation actually for Cam Sutton, which I love, and he's been doing so well with Bo Nix and JSN, is that recently I heard, now Sean Payton is a big old fat liar, and you can't really trust what he says or anything like that, but he recently compared Devon Bailey, that rookie, to Marquez Colston. He loves that guy, and Marquez Colston was like one of his favorite players of all time. So, like I said, he's a liar, so you can't trust when he says, I want to get Bailey to ball more, but I see Sutton maybe having a little bit more competition, and JSN is actually ascending while Sutton's kind of staying the same, and I see Bailey having an opportunity to kind of eat into that production a little bit. So that's really just the differentiation.
I mean, but I would say that DK is a bigger threat to JSN than anyone on Denver's offense is to Cortland Sutton, right?
And that's fair. That's fair. But I will say, we're talking about the highest rate pass offense. We're talking
DK
about a
is
guy
probably
that's
baked into JSN's value already at this point.
Yeah, there's no dynamism to that wide receiver 1, wide receiver 1B with DK and JSN. So I feel more static there. I think there's room for the Broncos offense to still kind of sort itself out. But both of them, I'd rather have Sutton and JSN than Myers or Ridley. So I think you're happy.
So let me talk about real quick a guy I have loved since the beginning of this season, never have questioned him, and that's Calvin Ridley. I've been on him since week 1.
I knew that was coming.
Never badmouthed him, never disagreed with Rob about how good he was going to be. Not only has Calvin Ridley been balling, look at his schedule for the rest of the year. They play the Commanders, the Jaguars, the Bengals, the Colts, and the Jaguars again. Awesome. About the most perfect playoff schedule you could have if you're playing wide receiver. So I am happily starting.
saying he's been balling, I mean, he has 9 catches for 140 yards combined over the last 2 weeks and no touchdowns. I wouldn't say that's balling. It's an average of 6 for 70 a week, like 13 points. Like
Games before,
Yeah, I
like if
wouldn't
you
say
go
that-
the last 5 weeks, he's been balling pretty hard. And yeah, his down games being 5 for 93 is not a horrible game for a guy that you picked up on waivers 3 weeks ago. But also,
4 for
that
50,
Houston defense isn't fantastic. The Minnesota defense is that he played against, but all of those remaining 5 games he has are against some of the worst pass defenses in the NFL. He's still getting at least 6 to 10 targets a game, sometimes more. Titans look like they're going to play spoiler and keep competing here, even though they're out of the playoffs. While I agree, I wouldn't put him over JSN. I wouldn't put him over Cortland Sutton. He's definitely in your lineup, and I think you got to feel pretty happy about it at this point. Look at these injuries, the wide receiver position this week. A knee issue, had CeeDee Lamb with a back injury, maybe a foot injury,
CeeDee's
maybe
fine.
I
They're
just don't want to play
managing
for the
his reps.
Cowboys anymore. Downs, important injury on the Colts there. Dobbs got concussed. This is the most worrisome.
You have to be worried about Josh Downs. The official report is they're looking at him as week to week now,
Yeah,
which
it's
means
tough.
we're not just looking at potentially missing this week. It's he might miss a few weeks. They might be eliminated from playoff contention in a couple weeks. And if and when that happens, if he hasn't returned by then, do you force him back onto the field? So there's some serious concern. Plus, this allows them to get a longer look at Adonai Mitchell, the rookie that they really liked. And they still have Michael Pittman, who's there. So there's plenty of reason. I think Josh Downs is the guy that if you were relying on, which he had been, there was a stretch there for 6-7 weeks where Josh Downs was putting up consistent production for you in your fantasy lineup. And if you were counting on that, I'd be pretty concerned at this point.
Well, the fact, too, the Colts still haven't had their bye week. So if you've got Josh Downs, he's out this week. You won't have him the week after that. Comes back and plays Denver, Tennessee defenses.
Yeah, it's
Time to
brutal.
find a Josh
You
Downs
might not be
replacement.
starting him the rest of the year.
Really all Colts players right now in fantasy are dead zone players. I don't want any part of them. I don't want Jonathan Taylor. I don't want Anthony Richardson in fantasy. I don't want Josh Downs. I don't want Michael Pittman. I don't want Adonai Mitchell, except for from like a dynasty perspective.
Man,
but
after all that talk about how great Anthony Richardson is, guys, is dropping the passes, but you want no part of him in fantasy.
So
yeah,
all
it's
the
almost
talk
like there's
is
a difference
because
between
guys keep
reality
dropping
and
the
fantasy,
passes.
right?
Which guy that can't
Drops
catch do you
is
want
an
on your fantasy
For
team?
one, drops is an unsustainable stat. 2, he's getting 10 carries a game. Any quarterback that's getting 10 carries a game the last couple of weeks, I think is at the very least fantasy relevant.
Yeah, but when you're talking about
He's
playing
startable.
the
I
bye
will
weeks in
say-
Denver than Tennessee, that's brutal for guys
Once
trying to
Josh
make the
Downs
playoffs.
got
or-
hurt,
Yeah,
Michael
that's
Pittman
true. The
had
schedule definitely doesn't help.
most of the game after Downs got hurt. Michael Pittman probably had the most production he's had here. Per snap basis. So Michael Pittman's one to watch out for if Josh Downs being out gives him more looks. Still looking at the bye week and that tough schedule at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Brutal.
How about tight ends? Last position we'll look at today, Kelsey, Kittle, McBride, Bowers. Everybody scored all these points. A preseason sleeper pick. Looks like the wide receiver or the tight end one right now. Jonnu Smith in Miami. Kendall, is he sustainable? This production he's been putting up the last 3 or 4 weeks?
I hate to admit it because I am not a huge fan when Drew's right about something, but I have to say, you said at the beginning of the year, when this offense gets rolling, now granted, they were without Tua for a while and it took some time for the offense to really start clicking, but now that they have been the last few weeks, you talked about Tyreek and Jalen Waddle, attracting so much attention, it's going to open up the middle of the field, and Jonnu Smith has always been a big tight end with big, strong hands that can make contested catches. And he's been producing. He's been a huge red zone threat for them. They get in the red zone plenty now. And with their upcoming schedule that we talked about, there's a number of games in there where he should be able to produce. So, yeah, I don't have him as like the number 1 overall tight end rest of season, but he's clearly, I think, a must-start tight end at this point.
I ended up starting him in my flex this week because I had Bowers at tight end and was low on flex plays and had worked out really well as pretty much my entire team's point output was Brock Bowers and Jonnu Smith. He's definitely a hole plugger. You've also got a guy in TJ Hockinson that I think a little more expected that he could be this good, although he missed the first, 8-9 games of the season. But now he is actually showing on that promise. Is that going to continue? Is that going to maybe even get better as the year goes on? Or should be worried he's only, he's had 2 good games out of the last 3, and that's kind of it. Feelings there,
No,
Rob?
I think it's going to continue. I mean, I think this offense, they're gonna go back and forth between targeting Justin and Addison, but I think that regardless of if they're concentrating on Justin or spreading the ball around, I think regardless of that, Hockinson is going to have a more consistent role within this offense regardless of that. So I'm big on both these guys. Jonnu and Hockinson have a defined role in their offenses, and you've got to, after this first 6-7 weeks of tight end roulette, nobody knew anything except for maybe Brock Bowers. McBride, even though he's not scoring touchdowns, is still being a beast. Kittle is on touchdowns alone being a beast. Kelsey's kind of back to form. But yeah, Jonnu and Hockinson are both huge pickups, and they have defined roles. So I think you're happy with both of them.
One thing that's
worth
mentioning, though, is that as much as I love Hockinson, I've liked that guy since college. He's a phenomenal talent. He is one of the most talented tight ends I think I've ever seen come out of college. And until his injury, we were watching the ascension of him as an elite player in this league. I was all over him last year, and he had a monster year last year until the surgery. But that game against the Bears this past week, when he balled out and he got over 20 fantasy points, 14 of those 20 fantasy points came on the final drive of the fourth quarter and overtime. So when there was 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter, he had 6 points in fantasy. So that is something that's worth just monitoring. He's going to be started in just about every league, I feel like, that he is in. But if he doesn't continue 20 a week, 15 to 20 a week, I wouldn't be shocked if he's more the 10 to 12 range on a consistent basis, knowing the talent elsewhere in that offense.
Hey guys, before we move on real quick, I did want to pose a question to you guys because, we've had most of the season underway and with this quarterback rookie class that we've seen come in, I have a little bit of a dynasty question for you guys. Caleb Williams showed a lot this last game. Now, the Minnesota has a tough run defense, but they've been susceptible to the pass. And Caleb has had his best game as a pro so far this last week. Who would you guys rather have in fantasy dynasty-wise? Would you rather have Bo Nix or would you rather have Caleb Williams?
Bo
It's
Nix.
that fast for you? Really? I think I'm falling on the other side. I actually saw enough of Caleb. I don't know if you guys caught any of that game, but he had some phenomenal plays, and
His
now
best
that they've
game
lost
as a pro,
well,
that's
it's not
going to
coincidence.
be that's going to be who the Bears get to come in and coach next season, because we know they're going to change coaches. They're talking about bringing in the Bills offensive coordinator. Last I saw as the favorite. Bo Nix is already doing what you'd like to see Caleb Williams do every week. Now, he's actually had a few good games in fantasy this year, although that has resulted in great performances as an NFL quarterback. I don't know. Bo Nix looks to me like the whole package is there, and I already trust the coach. I mean, like Rob said, maybe don't trust him to tell him the truth, but I'll trust him to make his quarterback good and win some games. I don't trust anything about the Bears. Going into next season, and without knowing the coaching staff changes, I'm going Bo Nix.
Yeah, I'm going Bo Nix as well. And part of the reason why I would was I thought Bo Nix was a better player in college. And living in Los Angeles, I saw USC play a ton. I get he won the Heisman, but there were so many games in marquee moments where he made head-scratching decisions and plays where it was blatantly obvious that was the wrong decision to make in that situation. And Bo Nix didn't get nearly the praise, and he didn't get near the love at the combine because he doesn't throw the ball as far as some of the other guys. But rarely ever are you required to throw a 65-yard pass in the air in the NFL. Outside of Hail Marys, that's pretty much, you never do that. And watching Bo Nix consistently get better throughout the entire year with a better head coach in that division where we know the Raiders are going to be a dumpster fire pretty much every year. The Chargers randomly have a good defense this year, but generally speaking, have not been good for a very long time. Really, it's just the Chiefs you have to contend with. So for a number of different reasons, I'd lean Bo Nix slightly.
Well, look, yeah, the marriage between him and Sean Payton is probably a better situation because there's a mystery there in the Bears. But I will say, you caught wind of Bo Nix in his final year at Oregon, but I've known Bo Nix for years because he was an Auburn quarterback. And when he was there was a very different Bo Nix. Now, the Oregon system really worked well for him, and that's why Sean Payton picked up on him because they run similar short timing routes and stuff like that. But the Bo Nix at Auburn showed that when things are good, Bo Nix can be very good. But when things are bad, for years, he was a backbreaker on his floor. And he hasn't shown that so far this year, so there's a chance that won't really come up again. But there were games for years at Auburn that he would throw 3 or 4 interceptions and just like pile on mistake after mistake after mistake. So it's not coincidental that the Broncos offensive line unit has the best pass protecting grades of anyone in the NFL. So that's a big part of keeping it right. So, I'm with you guys. The situation's a little better, but I just wanted to throw a shout out to Caleb because, I saw a lot in this last game and he had some incredible plays. There was like a scrambling to the right where only Josh Allen, I think, could have thrown that ball downfield as far almost out of bounds as he was running.
Caleb Williams make that exact throw at USC, and that video is everywhere saying this is a throw you can't make in the NFL. I mean, pick to be done. And then he threw the same exact throw this week, and it was
dime
like
down the field, way out of bounds. Yeah,
it works.
I've only seen Josh Allen make that throw, so I mean, it was really impressive. I was really impressed, and he put up 300. Now, granted, obviously he had the overtime to kind of pad the stats and stuff like that, but I mean, he looked really good.
Let's move on to Week 13 here. Let's look at some of our key games, and let's start Thanksgiving night. Everybody's going to be full, sit on the couch, watch 2 horrible games to start the day. Then we get to see the Dolphins heading to Green Bay to take on the Packers, where it's expected to be 28 degrees warm. Green Bay. Packers favored by 3.5 in this game. Kendall, start with you. Packers cover? You think the Packers win? What do you got here?
I mean, as good as Miami has been playing, we've talked about it for a few years now. Tua, outdoors in the cold, tends to struggle. He doesn't look like the same player. And 28 degrees, pretty cold. Some could push back and say, but Devon Achane's really been getting on track. But the vast majority of that's been on short passes. Achane's still not running the ball all that effectively. And the running game as a whole hasn't really come on. It's, he has 4 touchdown receptions in the last 3 or 4 weeks. So almost everything is through the air, which I do think in that environment is going to be really tough. But Miami does have a track record of playing really well in these types of games. And with that 3.5, I do like the hook. And I think Miami's a live dog. So my guess is Green Bay wins the game, but at 3.5, that's a little bit too much to lay, so I'm actually going to take Miami in the points. Rob?
Yeah, Miami's no longer the deep shot offense that they were last year, which would have hurt them more in this cold weather.
Yep.
They love the short passes to Devon and Jonnu, and I think that's going to help them sustain it. But there is this narrative about Tua in the cold, and it doesn't even matter if it's Tua. I mean, everybody, if you're a Southern team and you don't play in the cold all the time, you're going to struggle in this type of weather. And I just think the Packers being able to lean on Josh Jacobs as a power run offense, the Dolphins really don't have a version of that to lean on and to help bolster it. So I'm actually going to lay the points. I think the Packers win by 4. But, I don't think the Dolphins are going to look terrible. I just think that it's going to be too much to overcome when the Packers can get a little bit of a lead and then just lean on Josh to bruise these defenders, and go at the part that's not their best unit on the defense, which is their passing defense. I think that, their rush defense can still be run on. And so, I just see Josh Jacobs being a little bit too much for them.
I'm gonna take my homer pick here. I'm taking the Fins to win this game. Dobbs is out. Watson can't catch a ball when it's not snowing. We'll see if he can catch a ball when it's 28 degrees.
Dontavius Wicks can't either. He has a 26% catch rate.
It's horrible.
Josh Jacobs can run the ball if you get out ahead, but I'll tell you what, when it is cold and you don't want to hit, it's not going to be snowing, so it shouldn't be affecting too much the catching. But if you get these Dolphins wide receivers a quick pass, cold out there, I could see a lot of yards after the catch. The Dolphins offense, which has looked great in the last 3 weeks, does get out ahead. The Packers can just give the ball to Josh Jacobs 27 times like they could against the Niners this week, a team that they were blowing out from the beginning and knew that they wouldn't have to do anything but run the ball with. I don't trust Green Bay's receivers. I think Miami is rolling. I think we're going to take this on Thanksgiving, and I will be very thankful.
Well, before you move on, just a little note for everyone to know as well. Jair Alexander just got ruled out 25 minutes ago. So that certainly doesn't help the secondary of Green Bay.
Sure.
Now, they've been without him for a little bit, but still, they were hopeful to get him back this week. They're not going to.
This has been ruled out as well today, by the way, which I think we all knew. Now, how about we move over to one of the biggest games of the week, Eagles-Ravens. Ravens favored by 3 at home. It's kind of a pick 'em, it's the 3 points you get for playing at home. Birds teams looking like 2 Super Bowl contenders. Rob, who are you taking here?
This one's brutal. I haven't had any time to think about it. And, it's something that popped up was a video of Lamar's 3 interceptions being basically tipped balls from drops, and he's 30-3. I mean, he has really stepped it up this year. I got to give him credit.
3 of his picks this year came off the hands of a receiver before they were intercepted.
Yeah.
Literally, all 3.
Yeah, so 30-3, and he doesn't throw it unless he doesn't make really poor decisions. Now, actually, one of those drops I was watching was like basically a hospital ball. Like, I don't blame the wide receiver that didn't hold that because he was about to get crushed. But I mean, this one's tough, man, because what are the Eagles showing right now? Saquon. What are the Ravens' defense best at? Rushing. So, I mean, this matchup is really a spectacular one on all units. And what time is the game being played at?
25.
Okay, now this is going to be
40
funky.
degrees.
This is going to be funky. I'm going to take the Eagles here. With an upset, a true upset. And see, the Ravens, we've all kind of been on Lamar about his playoff record, but the one thing that he's actually done really well is primetime games. So it's not always big moments. It's just the biggest moments that he's kind of flopped in. So that this game, I'm going to go on a funky one because you can't go unit by unit the way I normally do because it's such a good matchup. I'm going to say this game is in the middle of the day, so I'm going to take the Eagles here, and we're not going to see primetime Lamar.
I'll throw another set at you. It's the only one I need to know. 24-1. Lamar Jackson versus the NFC. 24-1.
Only quarterback who beat him?
They don't.
Daniel Jones, who's now in Minnesota. So, yeah.
So that's all I need to know until he loses another game to any team in the NFC. I will take the Ravens against every NFC opponent.
I'm going to take the Ravens here, although I know that's a true stat. I don't necessarily know that stat means anything to me. I don't see what conference the team he's playing in would affect. That seems more like a coincidental who you're playing stat. But
8-1 could be coincidental. 24-1 means those teams don't see a player like that, don't have the time to prepare for a player like that. I've heard people for years talk about like he's the most difficult player in the NFL to prepare for. And when you only play him every 4 years, you're never preparing for a player like that. Then all of a sudden it's Monday and you're like, oh shit, we got to come up with a game plan to slow down that guy. That's why he's 24-1.
But I will say, and again, maybe I'm arguing against my own point here because I am taking the Ravens. But of any team in the NFC, who's got a quarterback that's kind of similar to Lamar that you could get used to playing and preparing against? That'd be the Eagles and Jalen Hurts, the guy that runs.
They're different animals, though. Lamar is so.
I'm just saying,
yeah,
it's going to be a close game. I know we argued earlier this season about Lamar's passing ability. Lamar currently now officially leading the NFL in passing this year. We've got Derrick Henry. Eagles have Saquon. I think this game's going to go down to the wire. I'm going to take the Ravens.
Actually, you know what? I'm switching. Yeah, I can't do it. The Ravens are they're a bad matchup for the Eagles, and their pass defense has been playing better the last like 3 weeks, month. So, and I don't know if Jalen's arm is ever going to be like a top arm in the league and stuff like that. So I'm going to be with you guys. I'm going to take the Ravens here.
I'm taking the Ravens, but I'm taking the Eagles to cover. I think it's going to be a 1-point game right down to the end.
Well, you're taking the Eagles to cover.
No, I'll lay the points.
Ravens to win, but Eagles to cover.
Just at the 3.
And we move on. We've got this Sunday night snow game. 49ers, Bills. But taking the Niners here without Bosa and probably without Brock Purdy, even in the snow. I'm taking the Bills to cover the 7-point spread.
That's a tough
If
one.
Purdy-
I think I actually have the Niners
Purdy
to cover.
plays, I got the Niners to cover if Purdy's playing.
Yeah,
San Fran's
last week
almost
when we-
playing for their season.
Yeah, and last week when we picked
Hey,
the
last week.
Well, last week when we picked the Niners in
Because he won,
Green
'cause he's
Bay, I
still
mean,
alive.
there were
Everyone
so
in their
many,
division lost.
and there were so many. We picked the Niners Green Bay game before all these injuries piled up. I mean, it was like not the same game that we originally were talked about and picked. So I mean, this one's a little bit like Kendall said, relying on Purdy. I think he's going to play though, so I like them to cover this 7.
Yeah, I'm with you.
But
I'll take
the
the points.
Bills to win.
Well, let's get a quick look at the rest of these games. We don't have to go into spreads. We'll just get our picks here. Open it up Thanksgiving morning, bright and early, 9:30 a.m. here Pacific time. We've got the Bears heading to Detroit to take on the Lions. Gave Minnesota a run last week. Can they do the same to the Lions? They're favored to lose by 9.5, Kendall.
I mean, I could see it being a game, but I'm not picking against the Lions in this spot.
You got to go Lions here.
Lions, I think they're going to do what they've done a couple times this year and run up the score on the Bears. The next Thanksgiving Day game, Giants-Cowboys. I know a game everybody's dying to watch. Cooper Rush versus who's quarterbacking the Giants this
It's
week?
not going to
might
be
be-
DeVito. It looks like
I was going to say,
DeVito's
it
hurt.
could be Drew Lock.
Who is it? Too late to go get
Drew
Daniel
Lock.
Jones back? Oh,
It's
Drew
gonna be
Lock.
Drew Lock.
yeah.
It's so
Uh,
who do
I
we
am taking
like?
the Cowboys. The Giants are the only team in more disarray than the Cowboys right now. It's in Dallas. Dallas almost always wins on Thanksgiving. I'll take the Cowboys.
Yeah, I'm gonna take the Cowboys too. Although I will say I think Drew Lock comes out, and I think you see a lot of targets for Malik Neighbors right out the gate.
I hope so.
I think this is actually gonna be a more interesting and entertaining game than people think. Cooper Rush has been actually pretty productive back there. So I think there's gonna be more points in this game than a lot of people think.
Take the Giants. Just it's a 1:30 game in Dallas, which means the sun's going to be shining in their eyes. I don't know if they can catch the ball in the end zone. I'm taking the Giants on principle there. The Black Friday game, a new thing that started last year. Raiders-Chiefs. Chiefs favored by 13. I'll start off here. I'm taking the Raiders to cover. I know we're not doing spreads necessarily, but we've said this before. The Raiders always play the Chiefs close when they have no business doing it. And the Chiefs haven't beat anybody by 2 touchdowns in quite a while. I'll take the Chiefs, but I think it's going to be closer than it should be. Yes.
Yep. You
Yeah,
took the
Chiefs.
words out of my mouth.
Chiefs.
About Falcons-Chargers Sunday morning. Chargers going to the Falcons, actually.
I have the
I like
Chargers
the Chargers.
here.
I trust the physicality. I don't trust Atlanta. Anytime they play a physical opponent,
Yeah, and Atlanta, honestly, they're falling apart a little bit now. I know they had the bye week to regroup and stuff, but they're kind of doing, not to keep going back to like preseason predictions and stuff. They're kind of doing what I was afraid of, which is just like regressing to the mean and stuff. I do see like the Dobbins injury hurting the Chargers a little bit, but Atlanta just doesn't have the defense to really hurt them.
Take the Falcons here. A couple of reasons. Chargers on a short week, coming off their huge Harbaugh brother bowl primetime, which they didn't do. And also, Chargers haven't been able to score at all. Without J.K. Dobbins, I don't see that getting better. Falcons have a bye week to prepare. Chargers haven't beat a winning team yet this year. The Falcons are currently 6-5, so I'm taking the Falcons. Steelers-Bengals, pretty much the end of the line for the Bengals if they lose here. It's on the road. Kendall, who you got?
I'm gonna roll with Joe Burrow, and I'm gonna take the Bengals. There's not a whole lot of reason outside of me trusting Joe Burrow in this offense because Pittsburgh, despite their loss, they beat the Ravens, but then they lost to the Browns. We saw both of those coming. We talked about it on the show. And so I was right on both of those games with Pittsburgh. So hopefully I'm right again that Joe Burrow in the Bengals offense does enough to get a win.
Yeah, this Bengals team always plays better in the second half of the season than the first, and I'm gonna pick them to win. They got a lot of firepower, and they've had a couple weeks with T and Jamar back, and they found Chase Brown as like a big outlet for them. So I just think they're gonna put up too many points for the Steelers offense. That's still kind of like not really a sustainable style offense.
I'm going to go Steelers here. Just their favorite to lose. The Bengals defense has been awful, and every time I just feel like, how are the Steelers going to win this game so far this year? They've won the game.
Do
I'm
it.
going to go ahead and ride with Tomlin and say, I don't know how, but I think the Steelers are going to figure it out. All right, Cardinals, Vikings is actually a big matchup as both of these teams' divisions are super competitive. So even the Vikings at 9-2 can't let up, and the Cardinals at 6-5 got to keep winning. Go in here, Rob.
I got the Vikings. I just think they're a better overall team. And although I could see Kyler having a solid passing day because the Vikings secondary has been able to be god on most of the year, they also have a pretty nasty D-line and a pass rush unit. So I just think the Vikings overall, they've kind of found something. Sam has now found that he doesn't have to hyper-target Justin. So their offense is a little bit multiple. And I'm a big Kevin O'Connell guy. So I'm going to take the Vikings here.
Kendall?
This might be my upset of the week. I'm going to take Arizona. I just feel like Arizona, talent-wise, their secondary is far better than people give them credit for. And Minnesota's really struggled for the most part to consistently run the football the last month and a half. So even though it's going to be a very close game, and I don't expect Arizona to put up a ton of points either, I think that maybe there's a weird ball that bounces a funny way, a strange turnover, a kick return. But my gut says Arizona's going to find a way to win this game.
Take the Vikings here with Rob. Let's move on. How about Colts, Patriots? I'll start with you.
I'll take the Colts just because I hope my Pats lose, because at this point, I just want us, if we can keep losing, we might end up with the number one pick at this point. Like we're getting pretty close now. Everybody has, Carolina has 3 wins now. So yeah, for that reason, I'm going to take Indy and hope that my Pats do lose, in fact.
Well, I don't care about your hopes and dreams, Kendall, because I'm picking the Patriots. I'm picking the Patriots. I actually think that this is a good opportunity for Drake May to have a big game. I'm a big fan of his talent. He's not on a great team, doesn't have a lot of great weapons, and he still does make these he makes some pretty poor decisions sometimes and has these fluky like rookie throws that can kind of bite them. But the Colts, I'm not a fan of their defense. Without Josh Downs and the questions at offense, I'm not sure that the Colts are going to be in an opportunity. Now, listen, the Patriots defense isn't good too, so I can actually see this as a potential surprising output by the Colts. But I'm gonna say the Colts are in trouble a little bit, in that I could see a good game by Drake May here.
I'm gonna take the Colts here. I think the Patriots are in trouble, and as we get towards the end of the season, I think they're going to compete less and less. So I'm gonna take the Colts.
Which would be great. We might get the number one pick,
which I think might be what they're thinking too. Look at the Seahawks, Jets. Seahawks going to New York. Jets out of it at this point. Can they put up a fight here? I'm taking the Seahawks. How about you guys?
It's so weird. Like, my gut tells me the Jets, this is the week that they're going to actually play well. And despite that, I've been bit by that too many times. I joined your wagon last week, Drew, and said, nope, that's it. Or 2 weeks ago, the last time the Jets played, and said, no, I'm jumping off that wagon. And I was right to do so when they lost to the Colts. So I guess I have to keep rolling with that. So I will take Seattle.
Yeah, I've been a big believer in Seattle. There's something about this game, though, bothers me in the sense of, they still have a great secondary, and their D-line has all these draft capital and stuff. And what's the Seahawks' weakness? Their offensive line. But I'm going to roll with my guys, the Seahawks, and this is a little bit less of jumping on the end-the-season Jets train and just a little bit more. And I like what the Seahawks have started to put together a little bit. So, and the Jets just aren't good. Let's just also put it that way.
Tennessee going to Washington to play the Commanders, although it does look like Commanders may be changing their names back to the Redskins soon.
The logo. They're going to bring the logo back, not the name. Yeah, they're gonna use the native logo.
Game? And how does that work as a logo for the Commanders? I don't know, but
they're gonna change the name to something. I think they've already talked about it in the offseason. They're getting out of the Commanders game for sure. But I'm gonna take Tennessee here. I don't know what the line is. I'm imagining. I don't know.
Washington by 5.5.
Yeah, I'm gonna take the upset here. I think the Tennessee defense is coming on right at the right time. The offense for the Commanders is seemingly worse and worse. They got McNichols, who's a solid back, but he's not as good as Brian Robinson or Austin Eckler at either of their responsibilities out of the backfield. So I see another slide for the Commanders here, and I could see Will Levis and Tony Pollard actually putting a solid offensive performance on.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm taking the Titans. The running back injuries, Brian Robinson Jr., was setting them up for success early in the season. And with him banged up, that offense hasn't been the same. So I'm going to take Tennessee as well.
Commanders here. I think it's a get-right game, even though their running backs are hurt, but I'll take Washington. Texans, Jaguars. Can the Texans stop their slide and knock off the lowly Jaguars?
Yeah, the Jaguars are awful. I don't, they're talking about Peterson making all these secret shadow moves to change stuff up. I don't believe it. I don't care. Whether it's Tank Bigsby over ETN, and I don't care about any of that stuff. They're so bad, and their defense sucks. I just don't see how you can pick the Jaguars right now.
I agree. It's hard to take them. I know they historically play Houston really, really well, but I can't pick the Jags to win a game, I think, at this point.
To take the Jags, it's looking like they will at least have Trevor Lawrence back this week, but I'm still going Texans. Let's not play. Saints, afternoon. And Rams, how about you guys?
Yeah, I'm going Rams. I mean, I know the Saints have looked kind of fun because Taysom Hill's kind of fun to watch and stuff, but I think the Rams D-line is going to eat. I think Derek Carr is not good under pressure and stuff, so this Rams D-line that's really come on recently, plus their passing offense against a pretty mid-level, mediocre secondary in the Saints, I think it's going to be too much for them.
Yeah, this should be a really entertaining game to watch. I think there's going to be a lot of explosive plays from both teams. The use of Taysom has opened things up quite a bit, but at the end of the day, I trust Sean McVay and the Rams and that, some of the talent on offense more than I do in New Orleans, so I'll take the Rams.
Buccaneers going to Carolina to play the Panthers. Panthers keep up that momentum they had versus the Chiefs, or is this the Tampa Bay -6 it's projected to be?
I mean, Carolina's a live dog in this game for sure, because it's not just the Chiefs game. They had won 2 straight before that. Bryce Young is playing as well as he has as a pro, so I do think they'll be competitive again against a lackluster secondary in Tampa. But I think ultimately I expect Baker to make enough plays and score enough points to win the game.
Yeah, I don't want to take Carolina lightly. I think most of the season as a Bucs fan, you're looking at this back end of the schedule and playing Carolina twice. You were kind of salivating and stuff, but this team has showed that they want to play for Canales, and Bryce is definitely started to show a little bit more of college Bryce over the pros. So I don't want to be like, oh, we'll destroy them. I do think that our offense is too good compared to their offense. To, like Kendall kind of alluded to, it's more going to be like, can they score enough points to keep up with us? But I do think Carolina is going to have some upsets the rest of the season based on like who they're playing and stuff. I just don't think it's this week.
Take the upset here. I'm going to take the Panthers, who coming off all the confidence building against the Chiefs, playing a Bucs team that hasn't won a game in 6 weeks against a team that's not the Giants. Home, I think this is a Bryce Young party game. Panthers pull it up.
Yeah, I mean, we only played the Ravens, the Chiefs, the Niners when they were healthy. Like, I mean,
the yeah. I mean, I'm not saying you've been playing awful teams, but the Panthers have been playing well. I think this could be a trap game too on the road, week of Thanksgiving. So I'm gonna take the Panthers.
Trap game for sure. Yeah.
Last one we haven't hit yet. Monday night, Browns at the Broncos. Browns looking to play spoiler again after last week's beautiful snow game. This one's not going to be snowing. It is only going to be about 45 on Monday night in Denver. Who you got here, Kendall?
I think, as we talked about last week, that was their Super Bowl at home against Pittsburgh. Now we will be reminded of who the Browns actually are. Nick Chubb still looks like a shell of himself prior to the injury. Denver at home with that defense, I like Denver. They should steamroll in this game.
Yeah. I'm going to take Denver, and I think that Jameis is going to throw at least 2 interceptions.
I'm going to take the upset here as well. Take the Browns. They've already upset the Ravens and the Steelers the last few weeks. I think they're going to have fun the rest of the year playing spoiler, and Jameis with no pressure on it is a scary proposition. I think it'll be close. If it's close, why not? I'm going to go ahead and take the upset here. Should do it for our game picks this week. So why don't we turn it over to Kendall and head to Kendall's Corner for some betting tips for Week 13.
So, guys, obviously there were massive upsets. We talked about it at the top of the show that crushed our money line parlay of the week. we had gone a good 5 weeks where there weren't any major upsets and we made a whole bunch of money in that process. But knowing things are looking a little bit more precarious, I'm actually going to look elsewhere for a parlay this week. Michigan is playing Ohio State in the game on Saturday. I'm a diehard Michigan fan. We are going to get drubbed. I promise you that Ohio State is frothing at the mouth looking at this subpar Michigan team having lost 3 straight and getting embarrassed, honestly. So State, the line's 20.5. They're going to win by 30 plus. And the over-under sitting at 43.5. I think Ohio State's going to try to run up the score. This looks like a 43-10 game for me. So I'm taking Ohio State and the over. And we're going to look at our frisky futures. In the NFL, in the NFC, as we talked about, Detroit is 10-1. Everybody expects them to probably make the NFC title game, maybe make the Super Bowl. They're plus 145 to make the Super Bowl right now. You bet 100, you'll win 245 back. You should also bet $100 on the Eagles to make the Super Bowl. You'll get 400 back. I dare anyone to make the case that one of those two teams are not coming out of the NFC, because I promise you one of them is. And if I'm right, then no matter what, you win money if you make both of those bets. I'm going frisky futures. I dare you to as well.
But I love it. Well, do it here for week 13 at the Winning Play Podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe. Follow us on all social media at the Winning Play Pod. Kendall Capps and Rob Hue. I'm Drew James. Let's go out there and make some winning plays.